Welcome to the Time2Fly Podcast. It's time to give your business wings and take flight to achieve more impact, influence, and income with unique perspectives, tools, and tips from successful entrepreneurs and business professionals to help your business fly. Here to educate, encourage, and entertain you with their own unique perspectives and experience, plus sharing anecdotes of growing up as cowgirls. Here's your host, Jill Fleming.
Welcome to this episode of the Time2Fly Podcast. I'm your host, Nikole Haumont, here with my co-host, Jill Fleming. A couple of weeks ago, we actually went to Wordcamp 2020 up in Phoenix, which is a WordPress conference. And one of the best things about having both of us go is we were able to divide and conquer the different topics that we wanted to go to and learn from. And today, Jill is going to be sharing about some of the different takeaways that she has from the conference. So Jill, tell me more about your experience at your first WordCamp.
Well, thank you, Nikole. Normally, Nikole is the WordPress guru, and she had told me about WordCamp 2020, and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting, but I don't design websites. But the very cool thing was I looked at the itinerary, and there were quite a few topics that were of interest to me. Today, I'm going to be talking about two of the breakouts that I went to that were really great. Actually, one of them was a breakout and one of them was a keynote. One that I really enjoyed was by a woman named Michelle Thomas. And she did a breakout called Becoming Your Own Advocate, Navigating Work in a Male-Dominated World. She went over some really great topics. And she said that women earn more degrees than men and are just about half of the labor force now. And they earn approximately 80% of what the male counterparts do, and even less if you're a minority, and also even less if you're in a tech sector as well. So that was really interesting. It's kind of very top of mind. And these are topics that have been very prevalent in the news lately about women in the workforce and different movements that we've had for work. And in the tech world, it very much is still a man's world. So it was interesting seeing a breakout between multiple companies, Netflix, Amazon, Twitter, Facebook, Apple, Google, and Microsoft, of the differences between tech jobs, leadership jobs, and total workforce of the percentage of women that are in the workforce. And she did talk about imposter syndrome, which I thought was really great because I talked about that last week in the podcast that I'll leave a link to in the show notes. So what she said about overcoming imposter syndrome is to run towards things that scare you, realize you aren't the only one who doubts their abilities, outwork everyone around you, and don't be a know-it-all. But do the work. Recognize the feeling and then tell it to go away. And then don't always say that you don't know something. One of the things that I try to do is to say yes and then figure it out. Michelle also talked about following your own path, figuring out what you want for yourself, and then to create a plan to work for it. And this is right up my alley because this is what I like helping my clients do, is figuring out their plan. Something that she said to think about was, what do you want to do? What opportunities are available to you? What are you currently doing that is getting you closer to your goals? She talked about also doing the work that you want to do, that some tips were to, if you find a problem, show up with a solution, show initiative, practice doing the work that you want to do, teach yourself a new skill, set small goals, and let your work speak for itself. What was really interesting, too, in the breakout was that there were quite a few men in the breakout session as well. It wasn't all women, but it really was coming down to advocating for yourself in the workforce. And I think as men and as women, we have to be willing to advocate for ourselves, for others to know our value. And one of the things that she talked about when you're identifying your value is that we really need to adjust our mindset from an hourly rate and instead create a price for yourself based on the value you bring to the table. With the work that you're doing, it isn't that it took you 10 minutes to do. And I see this with Nikole all the time. She can create a logo in no time flat, but she's got years and years of experience to know what would make that logo look good. And also what fonts to use. She's always telling me that I have too many fonts and things that I design. What do you say about that, Nikole?
2 fonts is plenty, especially if you're using a business card. Anything smaller than that, don't do more than 1. Anything bigger than that, make sure that you have at least 2 fonts, but no more than 3 on any given piece of collateral out there.
See, I told you. It's taken Nikole years and years of knowing that and owning a magazine and all of this experience to know what looks good and know what will flow and what is appealing to the eye. And so she knows her value. Other things to determine when you're identifying your value is complete some market research. See what the going rate is for your skills in the marketplace. Identify your goals and your cost of doing business. What is it going to cost you if you're creating a project or doing a project? What is it going to cost you to do it? And make sure that when it's being priced that you are covering your cost of doing business. And figure out how much time you want to spend working. It's not necessarily an hourly wage, but if you want to make a certain amount of money per month, you need to determine how many hours you're willing to put in and what you need to price things at to make it so that it's feasible for you to be in business. She also said to toot your own horn. And I am a big advocate for that because if you don't toot your own horn, nobody else is going to. And especially as women, I've noticed this with clients that I've worked with, we have difficulty tooting our own horn. And that is actually one of the reasons that I love co-hosting with Nikole, because we can actually kind of toot each other's horn and promote each other. And always bite off a little bit more than you think you can chew, because we often could do more than we think we can. And take initiative and do or ask for special assignments. So that is ways to toot your own horn and to get more noticed in the workplace. She also said to know your status. She said, don't blatantly ask people what they make in the workplace. She said, do not take this as advice because she's like, it's not my responsibility if you get fired. But if you have other women that are working in your industry, it's okay to have those conversations around money to know what they're making. And talk to men that are in your industry too and have an idea of what they're making as well, so that you know what your value is and what your status is in the workplace. Michelle gave some things to consider before asking everyone in your office how much they make. Some companies have rules against it. If you work in the public sector, are the salaries already published somewhere? Know what your relationship is with that person that you're going to talk to and where you want to have the conversation. And think of tactful ways to approach the conversation. And what will you do if you find out that there's a significant pay gap? That's something to be considered as well, is if you find out there's a significant pay gap, what are you planning to do to either talk to your boss, or is it really going to affect how much you're enjoying your job if you found out that you've been being underpaid for quite some time? I have a personal story that relates to that. When I was working in corporate America, I was applying for a job that companies love to have different levels. And I think I was at a level 14 and the job I was applying for was at a level 15. And when I went to apply for it and I got it, the salary that they wanted to start me out at was below the very bottom of the level 15. And I ended up saying no to the job because it was really only like a 4% increase in salary. And my boss ended up going to bat to HR to get me the level 15 salary. But it was the very, very bottom of that pay grade. And what happened was I ended up taking the job and I started working in that job. And within 6 months, I'd had a salary adjustment that they bumped me up another $4,000 because I was so far under everyone else's pay grade in my department that it was very blatantly obvious. So it's interesting how companies sometimes can do that, and it's something to be aware of. The other thing that really stuck out to me in the workshop that I was at about advocating for yourself is that as women, a lot of companies will ask you what you're making in other jobs, and we don't have to tell them. And she said that that's a huge proponent of why women get underpaid in their jobs, is because they think, well, you're getting paid this at that other job, then I don't have to actually pay you what we were willing to pay in this job opening. And so she talked about that there are states that are enacting salary history bans in order to help lower the pay gap between men and women. And what that means is that potential employers can't ask about your salary history, and they can't require that you tell them your expected salary until a conditional offer is provided. And they also can't exclude you from the running if you do not volunteer that info. And so it depends on what state you're in if those bans are in place. But she talked about how when someone's like, well, what were you making in your past job? Don't answer that question, but answer that question with a question of, well, what is the range of this position? So you ask them a salary question back. And if they're like, well, we need your salary history for our records, You can say, well, I'd be happy to provide that once a conditional offer has been provided. So you don't have to give them that information. And she highly advised against it so that it doesn't continue to perpetuate the salary gap. She talked about companies being willing to step up to the plate too and pay what the job is worth, not what the person used to make. Also, be willing to negotiate for what you really want. So maybe a higher salary isn't something you want. Maybe it's more vacation, or you want direct reports, or to be able to work from home, having your insurance fully paid, getting stock options, or maybe negotiating for a bonus. So those are the times to really talk about what you really want from your job. And maybe it's not more salary, but maybe there's some benefits you want too. She wrapped up the breakout session with talking about being the change. So as women in business, she said we need to band together to create change. And she said that there are women in tech events that are starting up and meetups that are out for women to come together to advocate for each other. And she also talked about being willing to advocate for women in your workplace, being willing to go to bat for them and advocate for them, or maybe taking them under your wing and showing them something that can help move them forward. With that, I'm going to take a quick break for a sponsor, and we'll be right back.
This episode is sponsored by the book Freedom to Fly, the Visionary Leader's Guide to Unlocking Your Unique Freedom Code to confidently create more impact, influence, and income. Get your copy of this best-selling book on Amazon.com.
And we're back. The other breakout session that I really enjoyed was the keynote that was put on by Troy Dean. His breakout session was called Think Again. In the breakout session, what I really enjoyed is that he talked about how our brain works. And I love studying this myself, of how our brain can play tricks on us. And he said that distraction is the number one thing that will keep you from reaching your goal. When we don't have priorities of what we're working on, we can get distracted very easily in a very distracted world. And the squirrels run amok that are taking our time. And when I'm working with my clients, I recommend prioritizing what is the most important and allocating time and doing time blocking in your schedule. He said that the only thing between your beliefs and your actuality is time and how you choose to use it. He didn't advocate for necessarily time blocking, but time blocking is a method that I use to make sure that I have time blocked out for the different things that I want to get accomplished in a week. Some things that the keynote speaker talked about were the belief systems. And I liked how he had created a framework that he called LTBAR. And that framework is your language, your thoughts, your beliefs, your actions, and your results. I'd heard something like this before, but I liked how he kind of tied them all together in what he talked about. When you empower others to make a decision, then they will own it. So knowing that when you empower others, you can change those belief systems, and that language impacts thoughts, which forms beliefs, which cause actions, which get results. And he gave an exercise that I really liked there too. It was the 6 F's, and it was choosing from 1 to 10 where you were at in these areas of your life. And I've heard this called a life wheel as well. This is an exercise that I've done with my clients in the past. He just narrowed it down to the 6 F's, and those are family, friends, fitness, faith, finances, and fun. And gauging your life on where those are from 1 to 10 kind of gives you a quick little temperature of where you are in your life and some areas that you might need to focus on. So I hope those tips were useful for you. Those are some of the takeaways that I got from Wordcamp 2020. Tune in next week as Nikole will be sharing her takeaways from Wordcamp 2020. Remember, it's time to fly. Give your business wings.
A big thank you to this episode's sponsor, Freedom to Fly, the Visionary Leader's Guide to Unlocking Your Unique Freedom Code to confidently create more impact, influence, and income. Get your copy of this best-selling book on Amazon.com.
Join our flock. Stay informed of all things Time to Fly by subscribing to our newsletter at Time2Fly Podcast.com. And be sure to tune in to our next show.